There was a janitor in New Hampshire named Ronald Read. He wore flannel shirts. He drove a beat-up Toyota. He lived in the same small house for decades, split his own firewood to save on heating bills, and pinned his coupons to his coat with a safety pin before walking into the grocery store. When he died in 2014, he left behind $8 million. Most of it donated to his local library and hospital. Nobody knew. Not his coworkers, not the people who drove past him every morning in cars that cost more than his entire wardrobe. Not the strangers who probably felt a quiet flicker of pity when they saw him waiting at the bus stop. Here's what I want you to sit with for a second. Ronald Read wasn't hiding. He was just playing an entirely different game than the people around him. And none of them could see it because the scoreboard he was watching wasn't visible to them at all. Welcome to Decoded Psychology. This is a channel about what's actually happening beneath the surface of human behavior, in your choices, your relationships, and the invisible beliefs quietly running your life. Today, we're going inside the minds of people like Ronald Read, the quiet ones, the ones who don't announce their ambitions and don't post their wins. We're going to look at the specific psychological patterns that separate them from everyone else and what you can actually do with that understanding. The first thing you need to understand about quiet winners is that they've done something most people never do. They've looked at the standard life script and consciously walked away from it. You know the script: school, degree, job title, mortgage, car upgrade, repeat. It's not that the script is evil. It's that it wasn't written for you specifically. It was written for everyone, which means it was written for no one. The psychologist Barry Schwartz, in his work on the paradox of choice, found something striking. When people have too many external options but no internal clarity, they tend to borrow meaning from their surroundings. They start chasing goals that feel urgent without ever asking whether those goals actually matter to them. Quiet winners have done the uncomfortable work of asking that question. And the answer often surprises them. What they find isn't some grand alternative vision. It's usually something much smaller and stranger. A specific kind of freedom, a particular kind of work, a life that looks almost boring from the outside but feels exactly right from the inside. Researchers call these intrinsic motivators. The psychologist Deci spent decades studying what actually drives human satisfaction, and what he found consistently across cultures is that people who pursue goals for internally meaningful reasons report higher well-being, better performance, and stronger resilience when things go wrong. Not because they're chasing more, because they've decided what enough looks like. Most people never make that decision. So they keep running and running and running toward a finish line that keeps moving. There's a psychological trap that almost everyone falls into at some point, and Morgan Housel described it better than anyone else I've come across. He calls it the man in the car paradox. When you see someone driving an expensive car, you don't actually think about the person driving it. You imagine yourself behind the wheel. The car becomes a prop in your own fantasy, not a reflection of their success. The driver spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, often borrowed money, often years of stress, to generate a feeling in a stranger. And the stranger didn't even think about them. This isn't cynicism. It's just how human attention works. We are all, by default, the protagonists of our own experience. Quiet winners understand this intuitively. They've internalized what psychologists call the difference between signaling wealth and having it. One is performed for an audience. The other is private. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most of what people spend on status purchases isn't really about the object at all. It's about managing a feeling of inadequacy, temporarily. Daniel Kahneman's research on hedonic adaptation is unsparing on this. The emotional boost from a status purchase typically fades within weeks, sometimes days. But the financial cost stays. The quiet winner doesn't need the signal. They already know where they stand. That kind of internal security is actually very rare. And it's not something you can buy. There's a word that gets misused constantly in our culture, and that word is ambition. We've attached it to volume, to visibility, to the person who talks loudest about their goals at dinner parties. But there's another form of ambition that runs quieter and in many ways runs deeper. Researchers studying high performers in fields from music to medicine have found something that cuts against the hustle narrative. The people who tend to sustain excellence over long periods are not the ones who broadcast their goals. They're the ones who protect them. There's actually a psychological reason for this. Studies by Peter Gollwitzer at NYU found that when you tell people about a goal and receive social acknowledgement for it, your brain registers a premature sense of completion. The recognition feels like progress, even though nothing has happened yet. Quiet winners seem to understand this instinctively, which is why they tend to announce results, not intentions. And they guard their time the same way. One of the most underrated skills they develop is the ability to say no without explanation. Not rudely, not aggressively, just cleanly. Because they've recognized that their attention is the resource, not their money, not their network, not their credentials. Where attention goes, everything else follows. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it rather than just moving to the next sentence. If you had complete freedom over your time, if you could wake up tomorrow and genuinely choose how to spend your day, what would you do? Most people, when they actually sit with that question, find that their honest answer has almost nothing to do with what they're currently working toward. That gap is worth paying attention to. Economists have a term for time autonomy, but Viktor Frankl understood the psychology of it before the economists showed up. In his work with patients who had survived genuine deprivation, he noticed that the people who held up best weren't necessarily the ones with the most resources. They were the ones who retained a sense of choice, even inside situations that seemed to offer none. The feeling of agency, it turns out, is not a luxury. It is a psychological necessity. A quiet winner's most guarded possession isn't money. It's the feeling of moving through their own life on their own terms. That is what all of this is actually pointing toward. Not the modest car, not the anonymous clothes, not even the financial security. Those are all just downstream effects of a single core decision to stop performing success and start building a life that actually fits. The people who win quietly aren't quieter because they've failed to learn the rules of the game. They're quiet because they decided the game wasn't worth playing, and then they went and found a different one that nobody else could see, grade, or interrupt. Ronald Read didn't need anyone to know he was wealthy. The knowing wasn't the point. The point was the life he'd chosen. The firewood, the coupons, the library books, the slow accumulation of something that mattered to him. He was, by every meaningful measure, a man who had won. He just didn't feel the need to tell you about it. The question worth sitting with isn't how to be more like him. It's simpler than that. It's just, whose approval are you actually working for? And is that the life you actually want to be living? Leave me a comment. I'm genuinely curious whether you lean towards stealth wealth or whether you think there's real value in showing success publicly. There's no right answer, and I think the conversation is more interesting than the conclusion. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, there's an entire world of it on this channel. Subscribe to Decoded Psychology, and every week we go deeper together. And next week, we're looking at something that might be even more uncomfortable, the psychology of why we self-sabotage right at the edge of the things we actually want. Stay with that. See you then.